On this week's episode, it's a world-famous G&T Q&A session where we answer questions from you, the wonderful listeners. We're covering colour space, insurances, why cheap isn't always best, getting clients and transitioning from areas to another. It's a really wide-ranging chat. We hope you enjoy it. Apologies also if you're a fan of Star Wars.
Good afternoon, Tom. Where do I find you on this sunny/cloudy afternoon? Which exotic locale?
Well, it's a very exotic location, and I'm surprised you don't recognise it because it has been the background for the past 28 episodes we've recorded of this show. I am still in my office. I haven't flown out to do something dramatic overseas or anything like that.
I'm disappointed you're not using one of those, those kind of backdrops that you can get on Zoom. We don't use Zoom, but...
Do you know what? If there was an option, I would be on the Death Star or something. Something really uplifting.
Death Star? That's interesting.
It was the only...
Why did your mind go there?
That is currently my mindset. So,
right.
Yeah,
are you surrounded by your stormtrooper army, or are you,
do you know what?
with the good guys?
I actually have never been a fan of Star Wars.
No, neither have I, to be honest.
Sharp intake of breath as I prepare for the hate mail.
I never really... I'm not sure. Some of them I just have never seen all the way through. I know that sounds criminal.
No, I think that's probably all right. You don't have to see them.
I mean, I vaguely remember one with Princess Leia and Jabba the Hutt. I think I had a crush on Princess Leia when
Sorry, even I know it's Princess Leia. So, don't want to be that guy. Look, Greg, we are going to get people properly angry and emailing in because we're discussing Star Wars, and the venom I can just foresee because you've said Layla
instead of Leia.
My God.
Oh, well, there we go. Is it Jabba the Hutt? Have I got that bit right?
You are right there.
Is it 2 words? Is he a hut that's jabbery?
Yes.
So it's Jabba the Hutt. H-U-T.
Yes, it's jabba.thehut@starwars.com. It's first name, last name, isn't it?
But what's the hut? Where does that come from? Like, he's not a hut, is he? As far as I remember, he was a big green fat thing.
The trouble is, because this is the FAQ episode, we'll have to get someone in who knows about Star Wars to answer that question.
Yeah, that's
I'm afraid
wrong
neither
podcast, really, isn't it?
Yeah, neither of us are the right guys for that.
Well, you brought up Star Wars. I'm blaming you.
Well, you're the one who's talking about Duke Skywalker.
Much better name, in my opinion.
It's a little. So yeah, season 1 of the Exposed Negative.
It's nearly coming to a close.
We're going to do 30 episodes in the first season. This is obviously episode 28. What's that? Yeah, no, I can hear your collective sighs of upset. Don't worry.
Relief, I think that was.
Relief. They sound very similar. But yeah, we have obviously had an amazing time doing this, and we're long live Exposed Negative. We're going to continue doing them, but we are going to take it. There is going to be a short break.
Hiatus. We hope to keep doing them. We need to figure out how to put some pennies in the machine.
Turns out, running a successful podcast, I've been told, is quite expensive. So and it's a drain on time and stuff, and obviously we'll get into this in the questions, but we're both kind of hoping to get back and being really busy very soon. So the episodes might be further apart, but we are planning to keep it going. But there is going to be a short break as we look for new guests, for example, or sponsors. And so if you've got any suggestions for guests, sponsors, anyone who'd like to be involved with the show, please,
topics.
Obviously, topics, anything, please get in touch. You know the channels. DM us on Instagram or drop us an email. And we obviously, it's always a pleasure to hear from you guys. And please send in as much as you can. Really, it's always useful.
We have quite a few questions for today's episode that's kind of come in mainly through Instagram. Tom, did you check the email?
I actually have the email set up on my computer, so yes.
Good. Yeah, Instagram seems to be the best way to get in touch, even though I absolutely hate the messaging format on Instagram with a passion.
A lot of people did slide into our DMs, though.
They did, and some of the questions probably warrant their own episode, just because we could really open them up. But we'll still mention them. We'll still go through them all, and hopefully you guys will find it interesting. We had a fantastic Clubhouse chat the other day, and they seem to be going really well. So if you're not yet following us on Clubhouse, or if you're not even aware of what Clubhouse is, then I totally understand, because I wouldn't be if I wasn't having to do it for this. But it is a fantastic medium for extra access to the guests, and we found so far that actually the guests have been really candid on that, and it's been a really informative way to kind of have follow-up questions if you've got them for the guests.
I mean, it's not even just extra access. I mean, it is genuine access. Obviously, we have these lovely chats with the people who are very kind enough to give us their time. But then, when you can actually, if you've got any questions whatsoever, you can then join us on Clubhouse and then ask them directly. It's an amazing platform, really. One that I kind of now have a bit of a love-hate relationship with. I love it, and I hate the fact that it's given me a sore throat every time I talk on it. I do talk for like 12 hours, though, so to be fair.
You filibustering. What are you doing? Why are you doing talking for 12 hours?
Which people are talking, like I log on to, some of the late night ones, and America's online, and then early morning, America's just going offline, and the UK's coming online.
You spend all night. Do you go into? Do you do this kind of under the covers in the bedroom, or how do you do it?
No, I've got a rule of no Clubhouse in the bedroom, and so we literally.
I had visions of you kind of with a torch on underneath the duvet, secretly on Clubhouse.
Head torch though, because I'm desperately saying doing applause. I didn't realise, but if you unmute and mute your mic really quickly, apparently that's applause.
What? How does that work?
I've no idea.
Does it even make a noise?
Can I just say, that may or may not be a thing, because it makes no noise, but it's a visual thing, and I think someone told me it as a joke to set me up. And now I'm saying it out loud. Yeah. It does sound a bit like they've got me. I might cut this out of the episode just to make sure they don't get the kind of
first. Oh God. You spread the disinformation even further. We have a moral obligation as podcast hosts to fact check the information we put out there. Never mind.
We do. So apologies if that's not correct.
Have you haven't bought any more kit this week, I hope? You haven't bought any more kit this week, I hope?
Never. I just don't. I don't even use cameras anymore, Greg. Definitely didn't buy a set of polarizer filters.
Okay. Interesting.
I've kind of got to this point with my kit where it's actually not. Oh, I bought some flags.
Oh, did you? You bought a flag kit?
No, I just bought some flags. The Conservative Party told me I should have flags on everything. And as a photographer who works with light, I was into that. No, I bought a set of those set of flags, and I've got a quote now for some custom stuff being made up, which is exciting.
What brand did you buy flags wise? Were they branded or were they cheap Chinese ones?
No, I think the ones that I've actually bought this time around are cheap.
Because there's not many flag companies. It's one of those weird things. Like in the UK, obviously the big one is Westcott in the US, isn't it? And
Matthews.
And Matthews, yeah. I was amazed when I had a look at how few kind of options there are. It basically goes from that to somebody like Pixie Pro.
Well, I had an amazing guy, a guy called Manhan, who used to be in Wembley and used to make loads of custom stuff for me, and it was really good value, and I was quite happy to go and get loads of stuff. But then his workshop got broken into, and all his stuff got stolen, all his tools welding stuff and whatnot, and he never managed to get back up and running. Yeah, so a bit upsetting really. So, but yeah, I've never been able to find a decent manufacturer since that doesn't for kind of. Well, actually, I know there's Daylight Textiles up in Manchester.
You do think and hope that maybe with the kind of onset of 3D printing and kind of more maker spaces and perhaps the added expense of now importing anything from anywhere to the UK because we've wanted to sail off on our little nationalistic boat, you do wonder whether or not they'll. Sorry, political rant aside. You do wonder whether or not there will be any rise in kind of UK-based manufacturing and kind of smaller niche manufacturing on demand.
Do you know what? I just get the feeling that things like flags and scrims are so niche, there just isn't a market for them.
Yeah.
So and it's really frustrating. So I've actually had to order a load of stuff.
Did you mean niche?
I did mean niche. Yeah. I've actually had to order a load of stuff in from the States.
Wow.
Because there's no importing stuff now from the States is as expensive as it ever was. So now I do kind of like one or two big orders a year from the States to try and keep the shipping costs down.
Yeah.
But the stuff I like is the stuff that
I can live in hope, Tom. I can live in hope.
Yeah, I think we all do currently. Speaking of that, shall we get into some of the listeners' questions?
Yes.
Are you impressed at that? Are you impressed at that segue?
Not really.
I thought it was quite seamless.
I've got a few that I think you'll like to start off with to ease you in. There's a tasty little one here that's coming from Tom, not you. So I see if I can get this right. It's basically to do with color spaces in Capture One, and we're importing automatically and then converting to sRGB. And probably what's going to happen is I'm going to read this out, and then you're going to ask me a follow-up question about it, and I won't be able to answer it because I don't have all the information.
Shall I just say you've misphrased the issue in how you've just said it?
Already? How?
Yeah. Well, the trouble is he's got a JPEG which is tagged as Adobe RGB 98, and then when he views it in Capture, it's then coming up as desaturated, and it looks like it's converting it weirdly to sRGB. Now, I've actually had this issue in the past, because the thing is, it really should be registering it as a normal file. But what I once had, there were two issues, or two causes that I found that fixed it, and I had a similar issue in Photoshop. A lot of us run dual monitors, and a lot of us don't tend to keep up the color spaces fully up to date and calibrated on both monitors with the same profile. Now that is the important part of this. So for a start, when Tom has viewing that Adobe 98 image in Capture, you obviously want to make sure that none of the process recipes are accidentally selected that have sRGB as an output profile, because I've found that sometimes on my copy of Capture One, even if I have that done, sometimes the preview window can get a bit funky. But also, and this happens in Photoshop as well, if you are working on one window which is 1998 and then one window which is sRGB, the Photoshop and maybe Capture as well, but Photoshop tends to kind of crap the bed a little bit and is not entirely sure which profile to use, so it kind of defaults to a bizarre one, so it doesn't look right on anything.
Right.
So
even though it's saying that the files are now sRGB, that it's actually saying that it's shifted the color profile.
But it's not saying the file's sRGB.
I believe it is.
No, the color space changes to what looks like sRGB in his question.
Well, no, I've chatted to him and he says that it's sRGB. So it is converting it to sRGB.
I actually have stopped using Capture for conversions like that. I now export everything 1998, bring it into Photoshop, work on it in that. And I just found that when I was exporting, there was just something that just didn't quite marry up with how I was looking at the original file. So now I do all my processing, and I do, I use Capture as the first half of the workflow. And then as soon as the image comes into Photoshop, I then really only tend to use Capture as a browser and then do all the work in Photoshop, because I was having similar kind of color issues with that. And then what happens is I obviously export a full res JPEG or a TIFF from it, and then I have an Automator profile set up or a service, so I can right click on it and then generate multiple sizes of the file, and I can generate them into multiple folders and things like that, all on the fly.
Yeah, he's I think he's having the problem appear on the same monitor, so it's not like it's.
Well, if that's the case, I would also tell him to go into the color area of the settings in Capture One, and just check the rendering intent, because sometimes the rendering intent can be different.
And where do you find that in the settings?
So you go into you're in Capture One. You go up to your settings, and then when the things come up, there's a tab that says color. You go across to the color, and then it shows your rendering intent. And then I have mine set as perceptual. But you have absolute color metric, relative color metric, and various different options.
Okay.
And if none of those things work, you might just quickly want to have a quick search of the Capture forums. And if that doesn't work, get in touch with Capture, because they're normally pretty good at coming back to you.
Okie dokie. Well, I hope that answers Tom's questions on that. I'm a bit bamboozled, but that's not surprising.
Well, if you're bamboozled, then the chances are the listeners will be bamboozled. So let's unbamboozle you and them. What are you bamboozled by?
Well, I was only half paying attention.
Well,
I'm as much bamboozled by his problem as to what exactly he means, and your solution to it. But I wouldn't worry.
Well, if anyone's got questions, email them in. I hope that helped Tom if he was paying a bit more attention than you.
So next question we've got. You're going to love this one. I kind of feel like it might be a joke question from you, and it'd be great if you guys could maybe touch on backup strategy and hard drives. I mean, did you send this in, Tom?
I did. You and Robertson is not far off a anagram of Tom Barnes.
I feel like you made up a profile and sent this in.
I did used to do that. I did at one point have a fake email address that was set up. But I must have been like 19 at the time, and I was trying to find out how much I should charge. So I just emailed my competitors from a fake email address, being like, "Oh, I've got a photo shoot. This is what I need. What would you charge?" And actually, very very sly, but it kind of worked. So if you do ever get an email from Amber Tons,
my goodness, it sounds like a name in the adult entertainment world.
Does a little, but it is an anagram of Tom Barnes. So
basically, if I'm ever suspecting of an email, I should just see whether or not I can spell your name out of all the letters.
There aren't very many combinations.
Disregard it. So yeah, you go. I'm going to leave this up to you. Can you touch on Ewan's question?
The trouble is backup strategies and hard drives. I'll cover this very very quickly, because actually we do need to do.
Please do cover it very quickly.
We do. In all fairness, we do need to do an episode about. I've said it from the very start of this podcast that we need to do.
I feel like we've done an episode. We did do an episode quite early on that kind of covered a lot of this.
I just don't think we covered it enough, Greg. If we'd covered enough, Ewan wouldn't have asked his question.
I don't think Ewan's been listening properly. Right, crack on.
Oh. Right, Ewan. What you want to do is so basically the 3-2-1 method. It's a very very straightforward method. You have 3 copies of your data, 2 on site, 1 off site. So that basically means you've got 2 copies of the data in your office. And remember, RAID systems are not a backup system. I can't stress that enough. They are simply redundancy in case a drive fails. So what I have is 2 hard drives which are identical, and they are the same. They're both RAIDed, but they are identical copies. They're kept in sync via Chronosync, and then I have a third copy, which is my offsite data storage, which comes in, syncs, goes away, and it means that in case my house burns down, or a robbery, or a flood, or any sort of, kind of a plague, you name it, the data is safe because the probability of losing all 3 copies in one go is substantially reduced. And I think that's probably all we should really say about it for the moment, because we are going to do... Maybe I could just do the episode on my own, Greg.
I mean, I think even if I'm there, you'll probably be doing it on your own. I mean, yeah, obviously software, there's lots of software that you can use as well for helping out with, you mentioned Chronosync and software like that for using that. So, I mean, I feel like, seeing as you like it so much, you should maybe just create a information pack and create it as a little PDF and then sell it for like 20p online or
there
something.
may or may not be something coming, Greg. There may or may not be something coming.
Keep an eye out on Tom's blog.
There we go.
So we then have a question from Johnny. Do you
want me to read this one out?
Yeah, go for it.
So Johnny says, printing portfolios, personal use as well as gifts to friends, etc. Which I personally have never printed a portfolio as a gift for a friend. I don't know if I've got any friends that, with the amount of time it takes to print a portfolio, I'm never going to just give it away. But I hear what he's saying. Do you print
lots of people might do that as wedding stuff, I think.
That's true.
That's wedding albums.
Well, he says, do you print your own or do you let a pro lab handle it? What printer, paper and inks to use? Best ways to present a printed portfolio and keeping prints in a nice box versus in a photo album, etc., etc., etc. So we both have digital and print books, don't we?
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's probably the same for a lot of the listeners. My book is changing because currently no one's really doing physical meetings. So I now have got in my head about 8 months to create the most bonkers print portfolio. And Greg, you know the box that I've got for it.
Yeah, the one that's got the handcuff.
That's the one, yeah.
On the handle, yeah.
So I ordered a 1980s old cinema lens case, and I'm converting it with custom foam and space for business cards and leave behinds and all sorts of cool stuff. It's going to be amazing, and it's going to be lit. And I don't mean that in like a cool young person kind of way. I do actually mean it will have lights in it, as opposed to be like, damn son, that's lit, etc. So I don't know.
Will it also have wheels? Because it's going to weigh about 15 kilos.
It doesn't have wheels, but it is going at extreme cost to have lugs welded onto it.
If you had wheels, you could ride in on it like a trunky.
I mean, at that point, I might as well motorize it, and then that is certainly an impression.
I think that would, yeah.
But
are you going to wear like an 80s power suit to go with the 80s kind of era thing?
Yeah, of course.
With shoulder pads.
You have to.
Maybe a big red tie on a pinstripe shirt.
A big red tie.
Yeah, Trump style.
Oh no,
he's stuck in the 80s.
I'm all right without turning up to meetings looking like that chap. What I will say though is Johnny actually makes quite an interesting point. Print portfolios, people love something to touch, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they are very much a reflection of you. If you turn up with a tatty portfolio that looks like crap, people are going to think this guy doesn't take himself seriously, and they are just not probably going to be that interested unless your work is really good. You got to remember, you treat every portfolio meeting like a job interview. So every time you go in, make sure everything is as pristine as it can be. And these, the people who are seeing your portfolio, they are used to prints looking a bit tatty, because the trouble is, when you have nice prints, they look good for, I would say, 3 to 4 hours before they get a mark on it. Even if you leave a print, because I print on matte paper. So if I print it I'll leave it on my desk. I'll come back 3 days later, and there will be a mark on it from nowhere. They mark that easily.
I'm sorry, I've been sneaking into your office and touching the prints with my jammy fingers.
I knew it. I knew it.
Do you print double-sided for your portfolio, or?
I did, but going forward I won't.
And why is that?
Because I'm moving away from a traditional book, if you will, and going down a slightly more different route.
Origami book.
Origami book, exactly. Where the help when the business folds. Huh? Thank you. Good kind of economic and origami joke for you there. So yeah,
I try to get one of them in every week.
Well, of course. I just think it doesn't really matter where you get it printed as long as you do tests. Greg can see up behind me. I actually have print tests for a new lab because I got rid of my printer. I know.
You put them in the bin.
Did
you put them in the bin?
Well, the printer? No, sold it.
I thought you meant like a print house.
No. I was.
What have they done?
Printing.
Did they do something really wrong?
No. I was printing my own book, but then the time it takes and the frustration when a print goes bad, especially if you're printing double-sided, because there'll be people who do it, listening and going, "My God, he is right." And I actually when I get busy, I get really busy, and I can't find the time to just sit down and spend 6 hours printing new pages for the book. So for me, I now use a lab.
I've always been reluctant to see. I quite like double-sided for the way it works and the way it flows, but I don't. I use plastic sleeves, which it's a bit of a Marmite kind of debate on plastic sleeves. Some people love them, some people hate them. From a practical point of view, they're so much more economic in terms of your prints last longer, and it's much easier to change the order of things in your portfolio. If you've printed double-sided, and you change the order around, so I think it kind of comes down to each photographer, and it's a very personal decision because it also comes down to you as a person, but also the type of work you do, the type of meetings you have. Like if you're meeting the same kind of genre of client each time, or you're working in one particular field, then maybe your portfolio doesn't change that much. But if you're working across multiple genres, then you might have to have different portfolios for different meetings, which means you might need to shake things up a bit. So it really comes down to that. And the problem with plastic sleeves is they also mark. So they do have a limited life because eventually they'll get covered in fingerprints. And, they're not great under the light. They sometimes become a bit too reflective. And then some people think that they can make your prints seem a little bit like half a stop kind of underexposed to what the prints are. So you've got to take those kind of things into account. But you also have to balance that with the economics of it and about how much people are actually paying attention to the portfolio and how much they're using that meeting as a chance to kind of interrogate you as a person. And also having kind of leave behinds which aren't your portfolio, is it kind of gives you an option to give them something else. So yeah, I think I personally let a lab handle my printing. We have printers in the studio, but I'm with Tom. I would not necessarily want to spend the time kind of working with, playing around trying to get the printer exactly how I want it to be. I've just never kind of got around to doing it, I guess.
I've done it a few times, and the trouble is I now have got a lab who prints on the right paper that I've always printed on, and I can upload 10 images to them and go, please print these, and if I order before 2:00, they will arrive the next day. I don't think I would have been able to work that quickly with everything else going on if I was going to be doing it myself.
Yeah. And the prints really, the place is really vary in price as well. I know in London there's Print Space, which is more of a kind of do-it-yourself. You can go in and use their computers, their calibrated screens, and then print whilst you're there. Obviously, you can't really do that at the moment, I don't think. And then the cost can really fluctuate between the kind of top-end, well-known places and then the smaller places outside of London, where you're more likely just to send off the images and get them back in the post than having that, depending on where you are in the country, I guess. In terms of printing books and things like that, have you ever done any printing like that where you've used self-publishing? I recently did it I had to put together a wedding album for my wife after a number of years of gentle prodding, and I used a place for that, and I was actually pleasantly surprised with the outcome.
Where did you end up using?
I used Sal Digital in the end, and yeah, it was good. I mean, it was all of these places, you've got to spend a bit of time putting it together, and there's a lot of options, and I'm sure people have had different experiences, but there's lots of others out there, aren't there? Like I'm guessing Blurb is still around. They were quite big, 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but I think they're still around. I'd be interested actually if anyone does want to leave any comments on Instagram with suggestions of where they use, then obviously we would be more than happy to hear.
Yeah, of course. And also I do know that people do use places like Blurb to do their portfolios. Because I think we used to, we obviously use individual prints, but there are people who produce these nice books, and I know it's a good tactic if people go, I really enjoyed that, and you go, well, keep it. There you go. Have the book, and the book's actually really, if you're getting 20 printed at a time, it might sound like a huge cost, but actually, the cost comes down. The more you buy, the cost comes down.
I think they're quite good if you've got a single project, that's not going to change.
Yeah, that's my issue.
Yeah, I've produced 2 kind of books that are for projects that I've shot in the past. I did one on the Palio in Siena, and turned that into kind of like a zine / book, and another one on like project I shot on gauchos in Argentina. And both of those I worked with a designer friend, Angus McPherson actually, and he helped kind of put them together and helped with the ordering, and it was a really nice, enjoyable, collaborative process. And I think, doing something like that can be a great way to kind of create a good leave behind, and B, actually it is a good creative process just to look at your work in that way, to think about things in terms of a book or a project. I think it's an interesting process to do, and it doesn't have to be something that costs the earth. I mean, Blurb's a good way, those kind of websites are a good way to put together more affordable, experimental projects.
Yeah, absolutely.
So moving on.
Does that cover it? Probably.
I think so. I mean, it may be that we actually do an episode in the future on portfolios and speak to some experts in that field. It'd be interesting. Years ago there was a website called No Plastic Sleeves, and I don't think it has been updated for a long time, but that used to have...
I have the book. There is actually a book.
I have the book in the studio actually as well. They did so and the book is still kind of worth seeking out, because it does have some useful tips for putting together portfolios. Another good resource for that kind of thing is a photo editor, and if you listen to last week's episode, you will have heard that we had Suzanne Cease on, who writes a column for a photo editor. They have a really good selection of mailers and promos that Rob Haggart, who runs it, gets sent, and that's always a good kind of resource if you're looking for inspiration and perhaps different ways to put work together. So yeah, hopefully that should have covered that. What question do you want to tackle next, Tom?
There's a couple of gear questions.
Go on.
That I'd love to get to. So Sarah says, Hope you're both well. Oh, thanks, Sarah. Yeah, we're doing all right. Doing all right. Do you think there is a decent, cheaper alternative to the Profoto, or just a waste of money and better off renting Profoto when I need them? I really love them and have rented them out before, just wondered, but I imagine nothing is quite as good. Now, I feel like I should full disclosure, I actually work with Profoto quite closely. But I would also say, so I'm going to let Greg handle this one, but for me, I have never ever had a problem or a failure or anything go wrong with them in my entire career. Actually, that's not true. I did have 2 things go wrong. Number 1, I dropped it 15 foot onto concrete. So I don't know if that I can really blame the light for my clumsiness. And number 2, I accidentally poured water in a rainstorm into an old pack, which blew up. Again, don't think I can really blame the equipment. But for me, I've always used them in my career and they've never failed me. Greg?
I also use Profotos, but I've had a few gripes with them. And they are great bits of kit. They are really robust and can take a lot of punishment. There's a few things that wound me up when the B10 came out, and I do love the B10.
Is it the grip?
Well, okay, so 3 things. 1, the grip, which I've seen people online kind of customize, but
they've actually quickly. Again, I'm not going to defend everything. They have released an update, so that is fixed on all the new models.
Yeah, unfortunately, I bought an old model, and it wasn't fixed on that, was it?
Sad.
Number 2, there's a little bit of a black spot when you're using the trigger above. If you hold the flash directly above the camera, as if it was on camera flash, it just doesn't fire. It doesn't fire the flash. So that would be fine if number 3 wasn't there, which is that there is no PC sync input on the flash on the B10, which means that you can't use something like a cable or a Pocket Wizard to fire it rather than their dedicated system, or unless you use it in slave mode and fire it with another flash. So those 2, number 2 and 3, I find quite annoying, because if one of them wasn't there, the other one wouldn't be so much of an issue.
Mm-hmm. Yep, I agree.
However, that said, I love the way they work, and I found them, to be solid bits of kit. Now, in terms of alternatives, I don't have much experience with alternatives. I used to shoot Elinchrom. I used to have the Ranger Quadras, and they were good in general, but there were a few bits that they weren't great with. One was the bracket needed to be strengthened, and there was a mod that you could do changing some of the washers out to actually have it able to secure and lock a bit better, because that's it. The TED had a tendency to droop if you put a heavy modifier on there. And the other one with that, I guess, would be the build quality. It didn't quite feel up to scratch with compared to Profoto. But at the other end of the market, there is a lot of now, especially a lot of kind of flashes that are coming out that look surprisingly similar to the Profoto flashes. One would say that they've been deeply inspired, perhaps, by the Profoto flashes. And, generally I've heard not too bad things about some of those brands.
I think the trouble is, for me, with these brands, and complete, brand loyalty aside, if I break something, Profoto is sort of industry standard, and it gets fixed. I know with a lot of these smaller brands, if you break it, the only option is to buy again. And as someone who does try to avoid putting as much plastic into the environment as he can, I feel that being able to get something fixed is probably better than having to buy a whole new block, even if they're cheaper.
Yeah, that's true. And I think, the option, Sarah, might be to buy second hand if the price is something that's kind of off-putting.
Well, currently, there's a decent amount of people getting rid of their B1s and B1Xs because of the B10 Plus. So if you are in the market, you can have a look at the B1. B1's still an excellent light. It's a couple of years old, but that doesn't stop anyone. Which actually leads me on to the next question, because gear is gear, right? Like, I think we as photographers are forever buying new kit because it'll make us better, blah blah blah. It won't. That's not how it works. So so this question from Matt. It's a gear question, something I've been thinking more and more about. A lot of my work now ends up on digital formats, nearly all of it. I'm shooting more work for Insta than ever before. He has a medium format Fuji system, and I'm starting to wonder if the pixel race is worth it. Do you think we need these bigger sensors, and is more pixels really needed as we shift to more and more hybrid world and workflow? Yeah, we're kind of with you. We've been experimenting with the supersize image enhancement in Photoshop, and it's very, very impressive. Actually, I don't think you need a camera north of 50 now. Obviously, that would be a very ignorant thing to say if I didn't acknowledge the fact that there are different sizes of sensors, and you do get a slightly different look with the larger sensors for sure. But do I think that the average Joe or just the average person on the street would be able to notice it? I severely doubt it, and I personally think 50 is more than enough, especially now. I could easily take that file to 100 megapixels using the enhance thing in the new feature. What do you think?
I mean, I generally have never really chased the megapixel size thing. It doesn't really interest me because, and in fact, if anything, it's sometimes held me back from actually wanting to upgrade because once you upgrade your camera, invariably you find you have to then upgrade your storage and upgrade your computer.
Yep.
And so you look at something like that and you realize the cost of it is actually much bigger than just the camera itself. And ultimately, I personally shoot with Fujis as well, and also with Canons, and I found with the Fuji X series that I tend to shoot a lot more than I do when I'm shooting my Canon for some reason. And I think probably it's because the shutter is so damn quick on the Fuji. If I'm honest, it's as simple as that. Mm-hmm. And you can end up just bursting shots out. And if you do that with the Fuji GFX, then suddenly you're dealing with terabytes of data.
It's decent, so ultimately decent file sizes for sure.
Yeah, I think if something, we're kind of getting to a point where what are you actually shooting for? There's certain jobs where I will pick different cameras to work with because of that, and I guess it comes down to that, doesn't it? It's like it's picking what the end medium is. If you feel like it's a project that you're going to want to put on a gallery wall in 10 years time, mm-hmm. then maybe you want to shoot with something that's going to give you the ability to print big. I
also think that there is a part of photographers, or a lot of photographers, especially how I used to be, that kind of wanted the latest and greatest. I used to think that a client would care that I was shooting a job on a Phaser.
You still want the latest and greatest.
Do you know what? As the listeners know, I've had everything. And actually, it's a sad state of affairs. Actually, I just don't care really about it anymore. It's all there as a tool at the end of the day. I was looking at the new 50mm that Sony have released, and it looks great. But actually, do I need it? No. 90% of my work is shot on a 24-70, as is most of our work.
Tune in next week to learn how Tom bought the 50 1.5.
Yeah, right. Start of season 2.
Yeah.
No, do you know what? It is just a tool. I had a couple of interesting chats. Tom, if you're listening, I did pay attention. And it's not the kit, what we produce with it. It's what we produce with it rather than what it's produced on, right? And I just feel that over the course of my career, I for sure have kind of definitely forgotten that, and I've gone, do you know what? I've got this sorted. If I buy this, that'll give me a look that will separate me out from anyone. And you go, what? No, it won't. Absolutely won't. Like the average viewer of the photograph won't care or tell. They will go, oh, I love the pose, I love the emotion, I love the framing. All these other things that come before. And the only people who really care about that sort of thing, bluntly, I'll be very honest with you guys, the only people who care about that is photographers. Sounds terrible, doesn't it? But yeah, it's true. I don't care.
Well, I think that's that answered for you, Matt.
Sorry,
don't
Matt.
Do it.
And also, can I also just say, don't buy a new camera. The chances are what you've got is more than enough. All these billboards that are all around the UK now, they're all digital. The resolution needed on those digital billboards is tiny. We're talking like 2 megapixel files to do these huge billboards because the resolution's so small because they're being viewed from so far away. The idea that, we need 60 megapixels or whatnot, it's just, I don't know. It's marketing gumph from a photo industry that exists purely to sell you and relies on people like you and I going, I need to spend £6,000 or £5,000 on that new camera. And actually, I'm on the photographer side here. It probably won't make any difference. There might be some element of convenience for you, but probably won't make much difference.
It's the tech world all over. I mean, that's really, as Apple are already working on their M2 chip computers, and the M1 is literally only come out, isn't it?
That's different though.
Well, it's different in the sense
because I want one.
Yeah. But the amount of, and I mean, we've both seen this in the flesh, the amount of e-waste that we produce as a species is horrific and not sustainable.
No.
And ultimately, how do we figure that out? Like, should cameras be more, I mean, to some degree, cameras are a little bit compartmentalized and interchangeable, but I feel like they should be a bit more, I'd be really interested in the future to see the camera where the lenses fit onto a modular box, which is purely the sensor and everything else kind of, attaches on. And that is already there effectively with a lot of cameras, isn't it? I mean, the lenses you invest in and it's the actual sensor that you're buying each time. But there has been talk of taking that even further with certain camera companies. I know that there were rumours that Fuji were looking to do something along those lines. I think generally, it would be nice to be able to find a way where we don't have to throw as much stuff away, or we could find a way to recycle things a little bit. But that's just my environmental rant.
I think the issue that I've got is because, say for example, we're buying the most expensive. People at our level, I guess, are buying the top level, the professional bodies. My issue is the churn. There doesn't really ever seem to be a proper break. It used to be a good couple of years before stuff would get released, and there would be a huge technical jump. And I understand that obviously as technology moves forward, the jumps become smaller and smaller and closer together. But and I know obviously with the jump to mirrorless, camera companies have had to, release more glass, new bodies, and things like that. At the same time, it does sort of appear to be tone deaf that a lot of photographers in the past 13 or 14 months have really struggled. They've really struggled with their mental health. They've really struggled with their income. They've really struggled with so many elements of being a self-employed business person, lack of support from the government, for example, that to have new cameras and new lenses released what seems like every few weeks is a bit boring. Anyway, that's me done with my rant. By the way, if any camera manufacturers would like to sponsor the podcast, we're looking for sponsors. And I hear you've all got new cameras coming out, so that'll be good. Do you know what Greg's done here, guys? He's muted himself and have forgotten to unmute himself.
I was ranting.
I did think I was just chatting to myself.
We've got quite a few questions still to get through, so
Well, quickly, for the listeners...
That was the fear.
Well, for the listeners and mainly for me, did you agree or disagree with what I just ranted about?
There's no way of it. I wish podcasts were more interactive because we're just sat here with no answer. Let us know over the ether.
No, I was asking you, not the listeners.
Oh, me? Oh,
yeah, the only person I can speak to in the room.
I do agree to a point. There's a bit tone deaf. I just think partly it's kind of the natural. It's a natural competition. They've kind of reached a point where the kind of the loop of change, the loop of technical change, and how quickly it is kind of stuff is being reimagined is got to the point naturally where it is happening every 6 months or so, and because it's happening, every company needs to be competing with every other company. So that's just the nature of consumerism. I think we should answer another question.
Have we got one that's slightly maybe a bit more upbeat?
Well, there's one here which is: when you guys work on a documentary job or a personal project, do you still mood board and delve into your archives, or is it a lot more freeform? That's a quick one for me. Yes, I do normally still build mood boards and delve into archives and look for inspiration.
It's a quick one for me. I didn't, but now I do.
Okay.
So no, I for years have been going in and doing personal projects and aiming to get as much stuff as possible, whereas actually I end up with these huge projects that really I end up with a selection of 100 or so portraits, and no one's got time or the patience to sit down and listen to me tell a story about 100 portraits. So now my personal project is going to get much smaller and much more finessed, and the target and the idea will be far more planned out, but also still remaining flexible, because obviously there is a huge element of flexibility in our jobs. So I think it's probably important, and I've realised this going forward, that not to get too married to the mood board.
Yeah. Although sometimes it's good to have it depends what the type of job is, but sometimes it's really good to have 1 or 2 killer shots that you want to nail, and have that in the back of your mind, so that whatever else happens, you come away with something you're happy with. And the more prep that you do, generally, the better in my thinking. We have another question here from Sarah regarding insurance regarding international jobs. So now we're in the time of COVID. I'm thinking about if I suddenly get quarantined on a job. I've got some freelance work coming up, and she's worried about the potential of being quarantined, I guess, at an airport, and what that would mean. Now, I did a little bit of research on this because the answers weren't on the tip of my tongue. So I spoke to an insurance company, and they told me that now, obviously, whatever I say here, you have to go out and do your own research. Don't take this verbatim or go on it verbatim, because I'm no expert. But generally, what you'd be looking at is production policy cover. Now, at the moment, production policy cover can be taken out per job, or it can be taken out annually. But generally, at the moment, it seems that most insurance companies are not covering things to do with COVID, because it comes under their conditions. It's not a force majeure or something like that. So, unfortunately, there isn't a clear-cut answer on that. Now, obviously, with insurance, the forms of insurance generally had by photographers. You've got your public liability, your professional indemnity, employer's liability, and your employer's liability is something that's legally required by most companies, if not all companies, and that is the employer's liability policy basically provides cover for any sum which the employer may legally liable to pay to any employees in respect of injury, disease, illness or death caused during the employment in the business of the insured. So if you're using models or assistants and stuff, that's why you would need employer's liability. You then have your public liability, which covers the cost of legal action and compensation claims made against your business if a third party is injured or their property suffers damage while at your business premises, or when you are working in their home, office or business property. So again, very useful thing for photographers to have. If something gets broken on a set, either by yourself or by somebody you're employing, such an assistant, public liability obviously can help in those situations if there's a compensation claim, etc. And let's be honest, it does happen on sets. We've had photographers, in fact, on this podcast talking about kind of situations they've had on set where stuff's been broken. And then professional indemnity. Professional indemnity, I think in the US this is known as errors and omissions policy. Is a kind of more of a legal thing. So professional indemnity insurance is often also referred to as professional liability insurance or PI insurance, and it covers legal costs and expenses incurred in your defence, as well as any damages or costs that may be awarded if you are alleged to have provided inadequate advice, services or designs that cause your client to lose money.
It's all fun stuff, isn't it?
It is all fun stuff. Now, the AOP has good resources and some recommendations for insurance companies if you're unsure of who to go with.
I think also if you're a member, you can get a discount.
Indeed.
At various places.
Yeah, that's worth looking into. On this occasion, it sounds like it might be difficult to get any cover for what this specific fear of yours of being quarantined, etc. Just because of insurance companies don't want to be forking out for COVID by the looks of it. So, as I said, do your own research. So don't take any of this verbatim, because I'm not, an expert in this area. But that's the little bit of digging that I did. That's what I could find. Tom, next question. What would you like to pick up?
Well, we have got a question here.
Question roulette.
Do you want to do the one from Steve?
Shall we save that one for the end? I think that would be a good one. A good final message.
Let's do that. Okay, we'll save that one for the end.
Like a Jerry Springer final thoughts.
Well, what about this quick one from Tom?
Go on then.
Hi guys, I was wondering if you've been following developments of NFTs, which are non-fungible tokens. They're in a way to assign ownership of a digital asset on the blockchain, as is used for cryptocurrencies like Bitcoin. Bluntly, Tom, I have followed it a little bit, but I don't know enough about it to talk about it on a podcast, and I don't want to run any risks of getting it, because there's money involved. I don't want to run any risks of giving people incorrect or bad advice, so I'm afraid I must bow out of this one. But Greg knows all about them.
Greg doesn't. We did actually. We this was mentioned very briefly when we spoke to Nick Dunbar from the AOP quite a few episodes back now, and it's something that obviously is developed more and more. It would be great to get somebody on the pod who can actually talk about NFTs. So it seems like they're kind of going through their stratospheric phase where everyone's jumping on the bandwagon at the moment. I've noticed that there's a couple of websites that have been popping into my Instagram feed that now offer to sell digital art, and I'm going to be honest, I don't really understand it. I'm still getting to grips with blockchain itself, but it's definitely an interesting technology, and I think it's not going to go anywhere. I think it's here to stay. It's going to only get more interesting in terms of potential opportunities, and I think there probably are quite a lot of opportunities with it if you kind of know what you're doing with it. So yeah, love to get somebody on to talk about that. Be useful to try and get to grips with it.
All right. We have got a question from Jason.
Okay.
You want to try this one?
Yeah, so he says he'd love it if you have a still life photographer on, for starters. Yes, agreed. I think that'd be great. And again, if anyone has any suggestions for people that we could interview, or people they'd like to hear from, then please leave them in the comments. And that is something we'll aim to do potentially in season 2 if we return. So his question is, how should a young in their career photographer go about getting those first jobs and start progressing? I'm self-taught and at a complete loss of what the standard process is. The only advice out there is from YouTube with no client work from YouTubers with no client work in their portfolios. Yes, agreed. That can be a slight murky alleyway to go down if you're going to be kind of taking the advice of people that don't actually work with clients and make their money elsewhere. It changes, and it depends on who you are as a photographer and what you're interested in photographing. My backstory and how I got into photography is going to be different from Tom's, and it's going to be different from somebody else's and somebody else's. Normally it's about trying to build a portfolio of really strong work in the area in which you're interested, figuring out who your clients are and how they go about hiring, and getting in front of them. Obviously that is far easier said than done, and glosses over a lot of complicated questions and areas to think about with regards to costing and putting estimates together and everything else that goes with kind of starting off in photography and understanding it. My big thing would be to any photographer who's kind of early on in their career is try and get on top and be organised early on. Be organised with your storage and your backup and your archive and your images. Be organised with the way that you create spreadsheets for your work, for your gear, serial numbers of all your kit. Just try and get as organised as possible, because the more organised you are earlier on, the easier things will be as you expand and grow and get bigger and you get busier. If you don't kind of get on top of that stuff early on, which let's be honest, most photographers don't, then you end up having to pay catch up later on, or having to go back and figure something out and it taking 3 or 4 times as long because the information isn't to hand or you weren't organised to start with. So there's lots of things you can do to try and just keep organised in your kind of admin, get your admin in order, and that will be a massive bonus. Have you got anything to add on that, Tom?
No, I think that's a pretty good answer. Yeah, the thing is, if you get the systems in place at the beginning and just grow into them, it's way easier to do that and stay on top and be organised then. For example, your contact database, which I think a lot of people neglect or maybe forget or don't even know that maybe it's good to keep on top of that. So yeah, I think that's a good answer. It does also lead us. Go on.
Well, I know it leads us nicely on to Sam's question, but before I move on, I just want to say, to summarise, Jace, the main thing is get your portfolio together, figure out who your clients are, figure out where they are, figure out how to get in front of them. Really, when I say your clients, it's like who's going to be paying you money. Now, if your work lends itself to editorial, then try and get some editorial clients, because that will be a good way to get your name out there in front of more people. It's a good way to kind of use that to gain more experience as well, on those jobs. The art directors, picture editors, people that you work with at those magazines aren't always going to be at those magazines. They're going to move on into different roles, and if you find somebody that you can build a good relationship with, they will probably take you with them. If you're, for example, if you are a still life photographer and that's what you like doing and you like shooting food, then there are plenty of food magazines out there to go and look at. Sainsbury's have their own magazine, and that's put together by a design agency. You've got kind of those travel magazines that have food. There's so much out there. So you go into, what I used to do is go into a newsagent, pick the magazine off the rack and find out who's who at that magazine, take the names down, and then try and find a way of getting in contact with that person who is relevant. Once you kind of get that done, then with the editorial, that will lead on to the more commercial work. And again, if you're doing food, then that might be doing cookbooks and stuff like that. That would be the next step. So it's finding clients and then working out a natural form of progression. You're never necessarily going to jump in. I mean, some people do, so maybe shouldn't say never. But it's unlikely you're going to jump in with a massive commercial job to start with. And if you do, and you haven't got the other experience to back you up, then it's unlikely that you're going to do an absolute smashing job with it. And then that could mean that you don't get hired again. So it's worth kind of getting the smaller clients and building it that way than trying to aim for the biggest if you're not quite ready. But I don't know what position you're in, so I don't want to assume. But yeah, that would be my advice. However, talking about your database, Tom, sorry to ruin your segue, that does lead into a question that we had from Sam, who says, "Hi guys." I don't know if he talks like that. "Hi guys." Loving the podcast, by the way. Thank you, Sam. There's a question. I was just wondering, I remember in one episode you were talking about CRMs, but can't remember which one. Any chance you could jog my memory or let me know what you've settled on in the end? Now, Tom, did you do your homework and find out which episode that was?
Yes. It's one of the previous FAQs.
Ah, good. So that would be episode 11?
I think so.
T&G on productivity. Have a listen to that.
That sounds about right, doesn't it?
We kind of are still on the hunt for the perfect CRM.
Seemingly doesn't exist. And with a lot of this stuff, and I'm sure, do you know what? If there's anyone listening who's got better suggestions, please let us know, because we, as photographers, we've got quite a unique series of data that we kind of need to stay on top of. And me and Greg, after obviously our chat with Art, we were looking at building our own, and the costs involved were just prohibitive. And it would be great to hear from anyone who's got other suggestions. But with a lot of them, it just seems to be, making them work as well as you can in the business. None of them are perfect by the looks of it. Some are better than others. Some are more expensive than others.
I don't think there's many that have been designed for commercial photographers, but there are plenty out there for more wedding photographers or kind of couple photographers and stuff like that. I think partly because a lot of them are a bit US biased, and that's a massive industry in the US, is kind of engagement photography and high school yearbook photography and what have you. So they're going for the market where they're likely to get the most amount of people, and that's understandable. But actually getting one that's relevant to, say, more commercial or editorial jobbing photographers, there doesn't seem to be one that has all the accoutrements. There's a few that I'm interested to see how they develop. There was there's one that's based in the UK. What was it? Blue something.
Light blue?
Yeah, light blue. I believe that was set up by the people who set that up are based kind of in Cambridge, so maybe they'd be people to get on the pod, and we could berate them live on air. Be like, why aren't you doing this for this?
If they're listening,
maybe they'll put some add-ons.
If they're listening, we won't berate you, but we do have questions.
Yeah, we'd love to introduce you to a potential new audience of 3, me, Tom, and Sam.
Cool.
Yeah, that'd be good.
Cool. So that's that one. And so do we follow up and finish up with, well, actually there is one from Tom. Ethics is 2021. We've got Magnum imploding, questions around representation, etc. Let's have something on the limits of jobs. Now, actually, that's such a good and large topic. We aren't going to answer it in 10 seconds on this episode. We are, in fact, going to do a proper episode on it. So please consider it answered in advance, and we are going to do our research and properly do one of the episodes coming up on it.
Yes. Excellent. And so the final question for the episode comes from Steve, and he says, here's a question. how busy have the two of you been this last year, really, in capitals? I think as photographers and as people, we like to talk up the times we are working and post about the shoots we do. And the result is that everyone sits there thinking they're the only one when they work and feeling shit about themselves. So it'd be awesome to hear some real talk about the times when you felt things were going badly, when the phone wasn't ringing, like it's mainly been for me for this last year. Well, Steve, you're not alone.
No, you are absolutely not alone. And I'm sure there are probably sighs of relief. You know, it's been crap this past year. It's definitely been the worst year of my career. I don't know about you.
Yeah.
I think without a doubt, this is probably going to be the worst year of many of our careers. I think that the thing is, what you got to remember is that what you see on Instagram and websites and stuff, they're very much the perfect finished product, and they're the kind of the representation people want to be seen to be having. So, you know, I've done a few shoots. I've been lucky that I've had a few things going on, but nowhere near my usual level. And I have been posting about them because I want my clients and the people who follow me to be able to see that I can go out and be shooting. But at the same time, I have been very careful to only post when I have been out shooting. I haven't been creating fake posts to make it look like I'm busier than I actually am, which I know a lot of people do.
Fake posts?
Yeah, people will put up just random pictures and be like, I'm out shooting, whereas actually it might be a picture of their camera on a table that's taken in their front room and stuff. I just feel that stuff like that is very dangerous.
I mean, I've used it as a time to go back through my archive, but I always date my pictures on Instagram. So if I'm putting up an image from 2012, it says on it 2012. And I find that actually I tend to do that anyway with Instagram, because quite often when I'm shooting, I can't release the images for however many months.
Yeah.
And so it wouldn't work doing that. So I tend to kind of post images as and when from previous shoots and kind of what I'm interested in at the time. But I think social media is dangerous in the sense that it does, even if that's the case and that's what's going on, you still get a slightly skewed, you're not going to necessarily pick up on that. I tend to put, again, on most of my images, not all of them, but most of them, I tend to put quite long captions explaining what the picture is and maybe a bit of a backstory to it.
Mm-hmm.
But most people aren't going to read that, let's be honest. They're going to be scrolling through and they'll see it and they'll be like, oh, Greg's in so-and-so. And you're like, no, I'm not in so-and-so. That was from 5 years ago, and it says on it was 5 years ago. No one's allowed to travel at the moment, so I'm clearly not there right now. I think it's, you know, if I'm being really candid, I had to do some sums and kind of economic, you know, look at my kind of economic forecast on one stage that I was looking at. I was down 80% of where I was the previous year.
Mm-hmm.
So in terms of, you know, it has hit a lot of people very hard, and it's, some people have been, you know, in more fortunate positions than others with where they're at in their life, you know, and it really can affect you in different ways depending on where you are in your career, you know, what your overheads are, whether or not you're somewhere with expensive rent or you've got a mortgage that's difficult to cover if you're not working all the time, you know, like I think everyone's had their own individual struggles, and generally with social media it's not going to show that because most photographers are quite sensitive to who's looking at their work and maybe not appearing like they're struggling, which personally, I don't know. I'm a mixed opinion of it. I'm not sure how important it is because, yeah, I don't know. It's a difficult one. It is a very tricky one.
Yep, it is. I can't disagree with that.
I feel like you don't need to, you know, I don't want to say you don't need to worry, but I feel like you're definitely not the only one who's been struggling. You're definitely not the only one who's had a quiet time.
Mm.
And the other thing, I mean, both me and Tom have talked about this, of, you know, going through periods where you lack a bit of motivation as well. And I think that can feel really worrying when you're not busy, but you also are not feeling motivated. But that, again, I think entirely understandable, and you have to realize that that is a phase and it's not going to last. It just might be how you happen to be feeling that day or that week, and that these things come in waves, and they come, you have your peaks and your troughs, and if things were normal, you'd still have your peaks and your troughs. You go through weeks and months where you get a few jobs you're really excited about, and then you might have a period where the work you're doing isn't quite what you want to be doing. It's entirely normal. But because we've been going through this kind of enforced situation for over a year now, that's a big thing to be dealing with. Tom's gone very silent.
Sorry, I just got nothing else to add. It's been a really crappy year. But what I will say is that it does feel like there's light at the end of the tunnel now. It does feel like things are starting to kind of, the shoots are starting to grow. And it does feel a little bit like the pressure's starting to lift off. I mean, the sun's out, people are starting to feel a bit more positive, and I am really hoping, I'm not going to promise you and tell you it's going to get better, but I am hoping that it is going to get better. And I also feel that you should be incredibly proud of yourselves for making it out of what has to be completely unforeseen and completely unprecedented in our lifetimes, economic shock. And I feel that if you have found it tough, that is more than normal. If you haven't found it tough, that's
don't beat yourself up for having found it hard, because that is entirely understandable, and that's entirely okay.
I would also say, if you haven't found it tough, check your privilege, figure out why that is, and also wind your neck in. Because don't go around saying, I got through it, no issues, anyone who didn't was weak. Actually, there's going to be a lot of people who you need to be a bit sensitive around, and just ixnay on the boasting. Just be like, do you know what? I'm good. I'm really pleased with where I'm at. Everything's all right, and actually, I don't need to show it off. And if you want to show it off, get in touch with people privately and do that.
I think part of the issue as well is we're in a very showy-offy career. The very nature of what we do, we take images and then
show them off
effectively, and there's a lot to be said for that. I'm sure a psychiatrist would love to have a deep dive into the psyche and of what drives photographers. So yeah, you're in a double whammy situation because you're in a career where that is the norm. But yeah, chin up. Thank you for reaching out. Thank you for the question, because I think the more people that hear that kind of thing, the better. And I know personally a lot of friends of mine and photographers that I know have been having a tough time, and they appreciate it when we talk about it and actually discuss it, because it's something that needs to be out in the open.
I just don't think a lot of people have the I think in our world there's a lot of facade, there's a lot of ego, and there's a lot of people who aren't willing to admit when things are tough. And actually, things have been tough. I think it's also completely all right, and I think it'd be beneficial if we talk about stuff like this more as an industry. We all need to really stick together, because now what's going to be happening is that there are going to be people who are going to be trying to drive the price down, knowing that there are people who are quite keen to get back to work, and you have to be careful. Because the price you set now could very well be the price you charge going forward. So think very carefully about everything. But don't worry, you're not in the boat on your own. We're all there with you. And yeah.
Good stuff. I hope that answers everything for you, Steve. Have you got any final thoughts apart from that? I think hopefully we've answered all the questions that we got sent. If you have follow-up questions and stuff, we will do a clubhouse, I guess, on this. So that would be a great opportunity for you to come in and ask us direct. It's obviously in a more public sphere, so bear that in mind. But
it'll be the 29th of April, the clubhouse.
Okay.
At 7:30.
So put that in your diaries.
Kibosh. Also, quickly, the Exposed Negative group on Clubhouse. Search for it, find it, add it, become a member. We'll love you forever.
Promise.
Promise.
All right. Until next week.
Well,
ta-da.
Week after, but ta-da. Thank you very much for listening to the latest episode. If you'd like to find out more or to see the show notes, please go over to exposednegative.com, or you can follow us on Instagram at xnegative. It's very imaginative. And if you want to email us, you can email us at info@exposednegative.com. I know, how did we come up with that? So I hope you enjoy the podcast. Any suggestions, feedback, or general harassment, please send it in. And yeah, we'll catch you on the next one.